Book discussion, The Man from the Future, The Visionary Life of John von Neumann by Ananyo Bhattacharya. I already spoke about some of the aspects of John von Neumann's biography when it comes to computing, in particular his contributions in game theory, and later on the von Neumann architecture and the visionary work that he did for AI. I think in this episode I want to do a formal review of the book. So I want to focus on three things. One is sort of the question, okay, what does it actually mean to read a biography of a man like John von Neumann? What does a biography bring to the table? I want to talk a little bit about some of the takeaways other than the computing side of things, and then just I want to make some stylistic remarks also about the authors. This is not even a podcast. It's September 3rd, 2025. This is Krim Delco. For the year, we're down 8.5%. The market's up 9%. We're on from 17.5%. So this is a formal discussion of the book, John von Neumann's biography. I'm sure there's been more than one biography written about him. This is the most recent one. And I think for people who are new to this podcast, maybe let me give you a quick intro into why we're even talking about biographies and things like that. The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So we've said many times before that we consider reading as not just a pastime of a hedge fund manager, but actually it's part of the job. The reason it's part of the job is because reading is kind of like yoga for the mind. Like you do the warm-ups, you do the stretching, you strengthen your system. It's your mind, so it's your neurons, the synapses, they get reconnected, rewired, and reading helps in that process. It's not just reading. I think physical exercise, traveling, social interactions with people, like the more exposure you get, the more you can learn, and reading is certainly part of it. Now, in this particular case, why are we reading a biography of John von Neumann? Of course, John von Neumann is at the heart of what we do. The purpose of Orange Capital Partners is to invest in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices with large impact. So that's what we do. We generate wealth by investing in new technologies. And von Neumann is a technologist deep at his heart. Now, he's actually a math person, so his actual background is mathematics. And, it's been one of the things I've already discussed that I think we sometimes forget how important mathematics actually is for the technology world that we live in. And sometimes mathematics gets sort of, put on the back burner here. It's like, yeah, the guys with the chalk and boards and the white chalk, when actually they do the fundamental work. They write the grammar and the language on which our technologies work. Whether it's a car, whether it's a computer, a GPU, a Blackwell GPU by NVIDIA, or an FSD by Tesla, or a Starship by SpaceX, in the end, they're following a language, and the language is math. And that language is absolutely key when it comes to any of the big developments that we're talking about today. But let's go back to von Neumann. I think one of his biggest contributions, in my opinion, has been the work on game theory. As an economist, I can attest that is very important. I mean, I've read his books, I've passed exams going through all of this. So the math of game theory is absolutely key. And here's why. Like, we see the development of AI going towards the bitter lesson paradigm, which is massive amounts of data, diverse data, and lots of compute, and intelligence is constrained by compute. But most importantly, also, the way intelligence evolves is the agent interacts with the environment. And crucially, the agent interacts with the environment in very simple terms. There's very simple computational priors that the agent needs to follow, such as, for example, maximizing a reward. But then those simple computational priors lead to very complex high-level behavior. That's what we call intelligence. So this is the key contribution of game theory, in my opinion. Von Neumann didn't call it as such. He called it game theory because he wanted to model interactions between agents when it comes to things like nuclear war, and generally also, if you think about it, I'm not sure if that it wasn't mentioned in the biography, but I think he also was an extremely anti-totalitarian, anti-fascist or communist type person. So he wanted to also find ways to model the democratic interaction, which is kind of a multi-agent game. So I think that's where his motivation came from. He wrote a book, something along the lines of The Theory of Games, with Oscar Morgenstern. Big for anybody who has economics on their resume. I think we all know this book. Big fundamental piece of literature that economics actually is based on, because most of economics that is actually useful, in my opinion, is behavioral economics and the kinds of economics where agents interact, experimental economics, things like that. And that's all based on this work. But most importantly, also, the ideas of reinforcement learning are formally also based on the mathematics that have been used in this book. Now, there's not a direct correlation. I think if you read Sutton and Bartow, for example, the authors note that RL shares intellectual roots with game theory. They particularly cite von Neumann-Morgenstern's book, The Theory of Games and Economic Behavior, which formalized strategic decision-making. And also they mentioned, of course, the min-max strategy, which then was used by disciples of Sutton, in particular, David Silver in his seminal work with AlphaGo. In principle, the work of von Neumann and Morgenstern in particular formalizes mathematically what RL practitioners today are doing, in particular the optimization strategies in the agent interactions, laid down in those books by von Neumann, and books and lectures that he gave. One of the most important lectures, of course, the lectures about probabilistic logics that he gave in 1952 at Caltech, which then influenced Jack McCarthy, and led to the foundation of AI in the 1955 Dartmouth conference. And I spoke about this in the last episode, so I don't want to go there again. But I want to say again, what does it mean to read a biography of a man like that? I think you get to see the picture from the perspective of the man who worked on some of the most important projects and technologies. But I think most importantly, it shows me that the Manhattan Project and World War II had this huge effect on people where they did things that they really wouldn't have done otherwise. Like, the Manhattan Project was a massive endeavor, and it was meant to build a nuclear bomb because the Americans were scared that the Nazis will get it, and they also couldn't beat the Japanese. So they were forced to build this thing. And because they were forced to build this thing, people really went out of their comfort zone to build mathematical models to calculate the potential dynamics of an atomic bomb, and they obviously succeeded. So this whole endeavor led to the evolution of computing. The ENIAC, for example, was a derivative of the Manhattan Project, because the amount of calculations that were necessary to build the atomic bomb were immense. And then, of course, people wanted to continue and build even bigger bombs and also understand the dynamics of bombs. And all of these ballistic calculations had to be somehow executed in a reasonable amount of time. And that's where the urge to build these electronic machines came from. So what I'm trying to say here is that it wasn't just some academic research that somehow, blobbed out of academia into the real world, and here we go, we have a computer. This was driven by necessity. This was driven by urge. And the reason I think this is important is because I think today we have a new generation of entrepreneurs, Elon Musk on top, but others that work very similarly. Now, they don't have World War II to put the urgency into people's mind. But what they do is they create these big, lofty goals, go to Mars, sustainable abundancy, other kinds of missions like that. And then they work towards that type of mission with the same kind of urgency that the people around von Neumann worked back then in the 1940s and 50s. Actually, fortunately, I would say, we also have competition with China now. And I think China is a godsend for us. Yes, it comes with a cost, of course. But the good thing about China is that we have an enemy. We have an enemy on paper that is forcing us to work hard, get up in the morning, and get shit done. Excuse my French. And that's important. So I think to me, that is a big takeaway from this biography. That no matter how smart people are, no matter how capable and all of that stuff, if they don't have a forcing function, you won't see the kinds of results as you saw them with John von Neumann. I think John von Neumann is a product of his time. He happens just to be the winner in a massive multi-agent game where there was a forcing function. We need to get shit done. And he just was the smartest guy in the room. But if there had not been the forcing function, I don't think, he probably would have just been a professor somewhere. And somebody said that recently, in our times today, if we didn't have this massive, infrastructure investments in AI, if Elon Musk didn't exist and Jensen Huang and a couple of other people, they're not the only ones, then a lot of our smartest people, a lot of the people that we that build massive companies now and really drive science forward and technology, they would just be professors somewhere writing papers. So we are blessed in that sense. I think we live in a time when we're getting back to the 1940s and 50s, when America is a can-do society that has lofty goals and lots of smart people working on them. I think this is my biggest takeaway from this biography. I'm very optimistic about the future. Because of this cultural shift, we're going away from a paper-pushing economy where people have no real purpose other than to go work for some nondescript company, move papers around, make a few bucks, either as consultants or bankers or lawyers. I think we're getting back to mathematics and physics, and of course now applied mathematics, which is what computer science really is, and electrical engineering, the execution of all these concepts into electric machines that can become super intelligent. So that's my takeaway from this book. Maybe I'm biased, maybe I see it through my lens. Of course I see it through my lens, but I still think that there's definitely a big grain of truth in this. The second thing I want to talk about is a little bit some of the other takeaways just from the actual biography. For example, the evolution of a man's mind and a man's career and what it actually means to be impactful. I think von Neumann was on top of his class. So I think one of the lessons for the younger kids here, listeners, is just you got to be on top, because once you're on top, you're going to be exposed to the best people. And with exposure to the best people, you can hone your skills and get better and better. So that's definitely true. This is not some Van Gogh, type person that works isolated somewhere like Einstein and develops a few papers and then becomes famous. No, this is a guy who's constantly at the peak of his game, exposed to the toughest, best, smartest people in his game. And also he happens to be good at it. So he constantly gets better and better. So that's definitely the case. I already mentioned the Manhattan Project. You need a forcing function in life. No matter how smart you are, no matter how dedicated you are, you need a forcing function. And I think the United States and World War II and post-World War II give that forcing function. to John von Neumann. A few words about the style, maybe the style of the author. I think the book was okay. I wouldn't say it's a great book. I think there's way too much technicality. Explaining game theory in a book like that, it's just not worth it. I would have preferred a lot more human approach. Who is this person? How is he thinking? Why is he thinking the way he's thinking? Instead of trying to explain to me the intricacies of poker and how that's mathematically expressed. I don't think that's worth. So I think the author is going a little bit too deep into the weeds. But so I would give it a B as far as the actual execution is concerned. But because the story is so good, it's one of the books where the story writes itself. I mean, John von Neumann's life story, by the way, including his early death. I mean, a guy like that, so smart, and then dies so early and still has this much impact. That's just too good of a story to screw it up. But I think this author could have done a little better on that front. That's just my 5 cents on this. So to summarize, I think John von Neumann's biography is definitely worth a read. Maybe stylistically not the best book, but the story is good enough to warrant the actual time invested in reading it. Anybody who's in the technology world, anybody who has ambitions to work in technology, invest in technology, have exposure to it, or even is just interested in technology, should be reading this book, because von Neumann is one of those people that has not just has had a lot of impact, but also stands as a symbol for what it actually means to be a technologist. So I think you can learn a lot by reading this book. And I think lastly, I want to just say the arch of AI starts with von Neumann, goes to John Hopfield, and now the torch is carried by Richard Sutton. Thank you.